Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the forum. And now we will proceed to panel 1 discussion titled Security in the Taiwan Strait, Great Zone Conflict in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and East China Sea. There are 5 panelists in this session, respectively from the USA, Australia, Japan, India, and Taiwan. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator of panel 1, Dr. Lai Yizhong, the president of Prospect Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you, and please welcome to the first panel, the Quad Plus Taiwan event. This session is about the security in the Taiwan Straits, especially on the Great Zone conflict in the Taiwan Straits, South China Sea, and East China Sea. As we know that the issue about the security around the Taiwan Straits started to become a central focus, especially after the war in Ukraine. And the people started to find out that the security situation in Asia, especially in the Western Pacific, is intensely linked with what is happening in Europe. And basically, we're having a interconnected Eurasia geopolitical theaters, which pitted the Taiwan Strait to become one of the most important issues on the security concern for the whole world. And we also heard from the President Lai this morning that his policy, not only he will continue what the President says about the maintaining status quo, but he is also would like to focus on how Taiwan could be an important contributor for the peace and security on Taiwan Strait, but also to the whole world. And another thing that we also noticed that is the security situation in Taiwan Straits in the past. And a lot of discussion being focused on the Chinese possible military invasion against Taiwan. But in the last several years, especially after year 2022 August, we started to notice that the increasing Chinese military presence in the form of the Great Zone operation on Taiwan, that become a very important concern for all of us. And just as we speak right now, and also yesterday, we also witnessed there are 9 to 11 Chinese naval ships, in addition to other numbers of the Chinese fighter jets intrusions in the waters surrounding Taiwan and also the space near Taiwan. So that when we talk about those issues, the Great Zone operations, that a lot of people in Taiwan will start to notice that this is not just a political signal, or in some strategists, they believe that this is a distraction from the issue about the Chinese military invasions. Great Zone operation to Taiwan not only is a daily encounter that we have to face, but also it sends out both a political coercion signal as well as setting the stage for the possible invasion against Taiwan. So therefore, Taiwan, the Great Zone operation, how to encounter that, how to face that, and how to connect that operation with other maritime security concern in the Western Pacific as well as in the Indo-Pacific. And that has become a very important issue for all of us. So we have 5 distinguished panelists here today. The first one on my right is Mr. Rick Waters, Managing Director, China Practices for the Eurasia Group from the United States. Mr. Waters is also the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the United States. And then follow Mr. Waters will be Professor Peter Dean. He's a Director in Foreign Policy and Defense, United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney in Australia. And we also know that Mr. Peter Dean is critical in formulating in the Australia Strategic and Defense Review in year 2023, and also contributes to the National Defense Strategy for the Australia. And then after that will be Mr. Tomihisa Takei. He is right now the Senior Fellow for the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And Mr. Takei is also the former Chief of Staff for the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. And then after the Admiral Takei's remarks, will be followed by Mr. Pankaj Saran. He is a convener of the National Strategy India, but also as a senior officials in the Indian National Security Council. The last one, but not the least, is from Taiwan, our very own Dr. Chen Mumin. Right now, the professor and vice dean at College of Law and Politics of National Zhongxin University. And Dr. Chen Mumin was also the deputy representative from Taiwan to India. He just returned to Taiwan this May, and then they took these important positions. So without further ado, let me invite Mr. Rick Waters for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and President Lai, it's great to see how this event actually comes together. I've read and heard about it for years. It's one of the premier fora for Indo-Pacific strategic discussion. I'll be brief. I want to go through three broad issues. One is a brief reminder of the problem, and I'll defer to our panelists who know and live this problem in their various regions. Two, I'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that are emerging as a result of the gray zone dynamics we see. And then three, I'll leave with a few thoughts about the challenges and opportunities that present themselves in terms of how governments in the region and countries of concern outside the region can help respond. So to begin with, the situation that we've been looking at over the past 10 years is this emergence of a stronger China with composite national power now being applied through a multidimensional gray zone strategy in an arc that spans from India through the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and to the East China Sea. And I say multidimensional because, as we've all been here just this week, it's not just the military and paramilitary dimension or the economic coercion that President Lai spoke so eloquently about, but it's also the use of legal tools, lawfare, in ways that are in some ways unprecedented. And so the nature of this challenge is complex, and it is designed by its very essence to fall below the threshold of triggering clear reactions. It's also, I think, a function of China's growing national power and the development of tools, including the Chinese Coast Guard, which, if you stack it up against Japan, the US, and the Philippines together, it is a bigger Coast Guard than those three countries have. So these tools that have also developed over the past decade plus are becoming more robust. And so that's the picture that we see today, whether it's in India with events in 2017 and 2020 along the line of actual control, and a reality that has left 100,000 troops facing off in a very tense situation, whether it's in the South China Sea with the events we've seen this year at Second Thomas Shoal, but also more recently at Sabine and once again in Scarborough. Last year in the East China Sea, as I'm sure we will hear from Takei-san, there were only 4 days last year in which the Chinese Coast Guard was not present in Japan's EEZ. It's a very profound picture that presents there. And I don't have to tell our friends from Taiwan what the situation looks like in the Strait. So again, that's the picture that presents. But I think to the second point I'll make, this is creating a number of interrelated trends in the region. The first is that countries in the region are repurposing aspects of their relationship with an external balancer, the US. And we've seen that in examples from Japan and the reshaping of the US-Japan Defense Alliance, to Korea, to the Philippines with the enhanced basing access that President Marcos has given to the US. So you're seeing this repurposing of strategic relationships with the external balancer. But that leads to a second trend, which is between countries, we are starting to see them rely more on each other. And I think that dynamic helps us better understand what's going on with the quadrilateral mechanism, which had its origins in a tsunami in 2004, but has now been elevated to a summit level and plays a meaningful role on issues like maritime domain awareness. AUKUS, which I'm sure Peter will talk about, a new minilateral mechanism between the US, Australia, and the UK. You have new trilateral mechanisms that have emerged over the past 2 years between Japan and Korea and the US on the one hand, and Japan and the Philippines and the US on the other. So it's this repurposing of relations with the balancer and then a greater reliance on each other. But, and this leads me to the third trend, there are some counter indicators, largely in parts of Southeast Asia, where the economic relationships are deepening with China, and where the desire to be kept out of the US-China competition, avoiding the foot of the elephant stamping on you, is a very powerful and understandable force. And so I think in sum, these trends are not all moving in the same direction, and we have to be cognizant of that when we think about the policy responses. So here I'll be brief, because I think much of this, to be frank, are lessons that I have learned over the years from friends in Taiwan, since unfortunately this is in many ways the laboratory of where many of the gray zone tactics, cognitive warfare, and other things have first been used. But I think that one basic premise is that China's moves in the gray zone space are often opportunistic until they meet a counterforce. And so that counterforce can be multi-domain and multi-dimensional. It can be informational about how you use maritime domain awareness to help countries better understand what is happening in their EEZs, what is happening in areas around them where they may not actually be tracking the full scope of the challenge. There are harder security tactics ranging from building up asymmetric deterrence, which Taiwan has been focused on under 2 previous presidents, the civil mobilization efforts that are underway here, but also the use of security and other tools to uphold and strengthen international norms. And I think that's where the US has been deeply focused on freedom of navigation and on the rights afforded to states under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. But we have to be honest with ourselves here that there are some things China is doing in the region, particularly in EEZs, that are consistent with international law. And I think there it can present an informational challenge, because where they have a right, we also have to acknowledge that as part of the effort to uphold these norms. In the economic domain, I fear this is the area that is the least advanced in some ways, in the sense that there are many discussions that are underway about economic security, about resilience, about putting forward new affirmative, not just defensive, economic strategies. And I think this may be the big challenge before us. How do you go from a diagnostic agreement about the challenge to an actual basket of remedies, practical solutions, collective resilience strategies among like-minded partners? And then finally, I'll just end with a point which the former Prime Minister of Japan highlighted. I think this is an issue that exists for our friends in the Indo-Pacific, but it affects others around the globe. And I think it's that awareness that has been leading the G7, NATO, European countries to start talking about the importance of peace and stability and about upholding these norms in the Indo-Pacific. And so it is that drawing in of the stakeholders globally that will be important, I think, to all of these efforts going forward. I'll end there, and thank you again, President Lai.
Thank you, Rick, for your remarks. Then next, I'd like to invite Peter from yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a real honour and pleasure to be here. I wanted to talk today a little bit about the international security environment and some trends and developments that really marry up with what we just spoke about. And then obviously a bit about an Australian perspective and where the Australian sort of debate and position fits. So it's not going to be as much about AUKUS, although I'm happy to talk about AUKUS in Q&A, not so much about kangaroos and koalas. But while Australia is a small country, we are an important Asian security partner. We are the 13th largest economy, the 13th largest defence spender in the world. and of course a key ally of the United States in the region, a key partner of Japan and Korea and the States and ASEAN. And overnight, my Prime Minister just signed a new defence agreement with the President of Indonesia, further deepening that relationship. But more broadly, I want to talk about, in recent times, the international security events that have basically reminded us about the interconnectedness of geopolitics, but also the continued splintering of our once very globalised world. We know about the increased use of coercion, aggression and outright military force by revisionist states, which is changing our international security environment. Russia and the PRC's No Limits Partnership, the PRC's support for Russia's illegal and immoral invasion in Ukraine, Russia's support that it receives from Iran and its new security pact with North Korea, as well as sanctions, grey zone operations, cyber conflict, all provide evidence to what David Sanger, the New York Times correspondent, who we just hosted in Australia last week, calls in his book The New Cold Wars. Add to this the Israel-Gaza conflict, which still today continues to threaten to boil over. These conflicts have driven wedges and exposed rifts in international and domestic political agendas. Misinformation and disinformation continues to be rife, stoking contestation not just between communities but within communities. And 2024 has been interesting. It has already offered up a series of contests of power in hard-fought elections from the United Kingdom and Finland to India, Pakistan, South Korea and Indonesia. In fact, it sometimes makes me think that the Taiwan election seems like a lifetime ago already, even though it was only at the beginning of this year. Of course, we'd seen not so hard-fought elections such as President Putin's return to power, manipulated in his election outcome by his autocratic government. And of course, we still await the outcome of the US political election later this year. Into this, we've seen a continuation of trends such as climate change, disease, financial crisis, and technology disruptions that require transnational cooperation in an era that is beset by geostrategic competition and growing geo-economic division. Another trend, I think, is the end of globalisation. While the world is much more economically interconnected than in eras past, and it means we'll not see distinct economic divisions like we did in the Cold War, the growing transformation of geoeconomics is seeing the re-rise of economic protectionism. We can talk about Xi Jinping's Made in China, the USA's CHIPS Act and IRA, Made in America, and of course, my own country's recently announced Made in Australia, which is seeing a resurgence of industry policy. Now, the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that decoupling from China would be disastrous, but she has called for constructive and fair economic relationship. In April last year, Jake Sutherland outlined the Biden administration's economic security approach of a small yard and a high fence to protect critical technologies. But this is not unique to just the big players. According to the International Monetary Fund, there were more than 2,500 new industrial policies around the globe introduced in 2023 in response to supply chain pressures, climate change and security concerns. Australia sees its economic security as part of a broader commitment to its defence and its security policy, and its focus on deterrence by denial, a strategic concept which has a key and critical element of national resilience as a core component of that. Now, reflecting on these sort of states and these moves and these trends, I would argue that we're in a period that is probably, unfortunately, a precursor to some global calamity. While the world may not yet be in crisis, it does seem to be dominated by chaos. And of course, Xi Jinping has made it clear that he believes international chaos provides opportunities to progress the PRC's expansionist agenda. Now, crisis might be near or it might be far, but in the Indo-Pacific, its most likely flashpoint is the Taiwan Strait. And it's particularly worrisome because if you consider the Australian scholar Coral Bell's concept of a crisis slide, such a slide into war is more acute in Asia as the region has fewer the guardrails to manage regional tensions if they do boil over into crisis. In Cold War terms, Asia looks more like the 1950s and 60s than the latter Cold War of the 70s and 80s when we had crisis management mechanisms, détente and arms control measures. And of course, we know that any crisis over Taiwan, any conflict over Taiwan, would have global repercussions. The localised or somewhat localised conflict in Ukraine and the Houthis' attack on global shipping has heightened the economic repercussions for any conflict can be vast. And any war over Taiwan would of course lead to catastrophic economic impacts, particularly as we know Taiwan dominates the chip market and advanced chips, which basically are in everything from Apple iPhones to F-35 strike fighters to HIMARS rocket systems and smart televisions. While the risk of war in Taiwan is small and I think often overestimated, many regard the risk as growing. In my own country, a prominent Australian commentator and most recently Secretary of the Home Affairs Department, Mike Pezzullo, has recently publicly stated that his own conflict risk status has moved from about 10% to 20%, and cited the US CIA's assessment of Chinese President Xi Jinping's PLA being ready to invade Taiwan by 2027 as his key marker point. So Australia also matters very much to Australia. It is one of the largest two-way trade, and in fact Australia's 9th largest two-way trade partner, our 6th largest partner in goods and services. And we've seen a significant 50% increase year on year of our two-way trade services from 2023 into 2024. And a significant amount of Taiwanese investment into Australia's economy and vice versa. But in my own country, just to give you a bit of an assessment, there is a bit of an issue with how we understand Taiwan and the security issues in our immediate region. We've seen a particular change since 2020, but it was not until the 2023 Defence Strategic Review that we reorientated our defence policy to this risk of major war and a focus on maintaining the regional strategic balance through allies and partners, especially our alliance with the United States, through deterrence by denial and a military strategy of denial. And critical to that is the maintenance of that regional strategic balance, and deterrence is the maintenance of the status quo over Taiwan. Now, our Prime Minister at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2023 said that Australia is not opting out of any of the big questions of security and stability in the region, and of course there is no more of a bigger question for Indo-Pacific security than the Taiwan Strait. However, my own country has an issue at the moment in discussing and articulating its role and response to security issues around Taiwan. Australia has a Taiwan problem that most of our political elites, our foreign policy journalists and commentators, would mean that it largely reflects to a very narrow, self-reflective debate. Would Australia support the United States in a war against China over Taiwan? And publicly, this is often framed in the concept that it would a war that most likely America would start, even though that is not the most likely hypothesis. Australian debate over Taiwan is almost, in the public sphere at least, unlike the government sphere, focused on this one narrow hypothesis and scenario. This approach really disenfranchises in the debate in Australia the Taiwanese people and democracy, and it fails to recognise the more aggressive tone and approach to the PRC's attempt to change the status quo in Taiwan. It merely reflects it down to a bipolar US-China struggle, which disempowers not only Taiwan, but Australia itself as a mere adjunct to US power, removes my own country's agency, belittles regional multilateral and multilateral security architecture, and of course ignores the role of other major regional powers like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, the rest of ASEAN, and broader Indo-Pacific states such as India. It reduces this flashpoint into kind of a binary national discussion in Australia that defies our declared regional balancing strategy, enabled through allies and partners and our focus on deterrence. So in my country, to progress the regional relationship, Australia needs to reconceive its public debate about Taiwan, which seems very divorced from the debate that our government has and our security agencies and Department of Defence has. One of the first things it has to do is refocus on what this panel is about, is discussing and recognising and analysing and countering grey zone operations, not just as we highlight very much in Australia in the South China Sea, but also in the East China Sea and around Taiwan. This is important, but difficult to do. Of course, the PRC remains Australia's major trading partner. And my government's attempts to reset and refocus and stabilise its relationship with China has to be done against the backdrop of these regional security environment. But I'll just finish by quoting my Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, who noted last year that it still remains absolutely essential for Australia to focus on this issue. Because she said, and I'll quote, "Let me be absolutely clear, a war over Taiwan would be catastrophic for all. We know there'd be no real winners, and we know maintaining the status quo is comprehensively superior to any alternative. It will be challenging, requiring both reassurance and deterrence, but is a proposition most capable of averting conflict and enabling the region to live in peace and prosperity." Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your remarks. And next, I'd like to invite Admiral Takei.
Thank you very much. I just comment from the Japanese perspective about the gray zone situation in the Taiwan Strait and in the Pacific region. I think the security situation around Taiwan and its neighbors is the most serious and complicated since the end of the Cold War. While the East China Sea and the South China Sea are connected by Taiwan Strait, we must view the gray zone situation in the Taiwan Strait as an issue for all of East Asia, as well as for the international community. I think there are four features of gray zone situation in East Asia. First, it is China. It is China's unilateral attempt to change the status quo. All the gray zone situation in East Asia are initiated and escalated unilaterally by China. China has abandoned communism already, but continue to strengthen its autocracy for Chinese Communist Party's survival. The current situation in the Taiwan Strait is created by the combination of China's political necessity and strategic preference of continental power. Second, its physical objective is territory. Whether it is Taiwan, the Senkaku Island, and land features in the South China Sea, the physical objective is territory as well. Third, it directly affects freedom of navigation in the region. Since the Western Pacific is a group of maritime nations, the territorial issues are inevitably maritime issues and affect freedom of navigation there. And the fourth, it is kind of protracted strategy to change the status quo by non-military means using coercive tactics that are shorter than use of force in scale and effect, and that consume the willpower of the government and the people of the target country. China is the only country in the world with a national power, great national power, and unique political system to be able to conduct protracted gray zone strategies in several places at once, at the same time with flexibly changing the speed and scale of situation that we are observed in the South China Sea. And for the Chinese Communist Party, territorial ownership is an issue that can never be conceded because it directly affects the legitimacy of the one-party rule system. China officially positioned in Senkaku Island as a core interest in 2013 when President Xi Jinping began his first term. Since then, the Chinese government can never make concessions to Japan concerning the territory about Senkaku issues because it would lead to the denial of the legitimacy of Chinese Communist Party and President Xi Jinping. Even more than Senkaku Island, in the words of President Xi, Taiwan question is at the very core of Chinese core interest and an issue that absolutely cannot be compromised by Beijing. From this point of view, Japan and Taiwan are inseparably linked in many ways. In particular, the two are in the same boat when it comes to national securities. On the other hand, the Japanese and Japanese government are less aware of Taiwan's geopolitical value to Japan nor Taiwan-Japan connectivity, so they tend to think of Taiwan contingency as simply spilling over to Senkaku Island and the Sakishima and elsewhere. But Japan must imagine 2 points. The first, what would happen if Taiwan were somehow integrated into China? And the second, if Japan and the United States failed to defend Taiwan, even in the gray zone situation, a completely different world will emerge in East Asia. To prevent such a situation, for Japan, it needs to complement and strengthen the military superiority of the United States, which is the foundation of East Asian security, but is relatively shrinking due to China's remarkable defense buildup. At the same time, Japan needs to strengthen its defense capability through self-help effort to prepare for emergencies. For the Japan-US alliance, it needs to work together to maintain the status quo in the three straits around Taiwan. To this end, Japan-US-Taiwan security cooperation should be promoted. I want to say the concrete measure to enhance US-Japan-Taiwan, I think it is indirect triangle approach with the United States in the middle. First, Japan should involve the US-Taiwan policy proactively. For example, through policy discussions, the government should share situation awareness, role and mission to meet assumed situation in 2027. They could also discuss politically sensitive issues, but critically important issues such as timing the US Marine Corps deployment to Sakishima Island prior to the Taiwan contingency. That is an issue the country should discuss. And second, it is information sharing between Japan and Taiwan. The Japan-US-Taiwan triangle framework will work. This framework could contribute various trilateral coordination as well, except beside the information sharing. Third, Japan can contribute to enhance US extended alliance credibility, which covers Taiwan's as well. For example, Japan's new defense capabilities such as counter-strike capability, active cyber defense. If Japan government organically integrates such a capability to the US extended alliance posture, maybe US extended credibility dramatically change in the future. I stop here.
Thank you, Admiral Takei, and particularly you mentioned about how Japan would like to participate in the US-Taiwan policy discussions. That is the first time I heard from the former officials from Japan, but I'm really glad to hear that. So the next, I'd like to invite Pankaj Saran from India for your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Lai, and I want to begin by thanking Prospect Foundation for inviting me. I must confess, this is my first visit to Taiwan, and I hope not the last. But I'm really impressed by what I have seen since my arrival. Now, what I would like to begin with is to put the whole situation where we are located in a slightly broader context. There are basically, in my mind, 4 characteristics of the global landscape that are of relevance to this region. Firstly, the unraveling and in some instances the breakdown of the international order and international law. Secondly, acute great power competition. Third, the resurgence of war and the use of hard power to settle interstate conflicts. And fourthly, the interconnectedness of global threats and conflicts. And in many ways, all these 4 trends are manifesting themselves in this part of the world. The result is that many of the assumptions of the past are no longer adequate to guide us and to prepare us for the future. And so we have to be prepared for geostrategic and geopolitical shocks. And in some ways, to quote the famous comment, we know the known unknowns, but increasingly is the unknown unknowns that are of concern to all of us, particularly in this region. When we talk about Taiwan and a little bit from the Indian perspective, India is one of those unique countries which actually has been, in some senses, a frontline state insofar as China is concerned. And not so long ago, in 2020, we had a huge flare-up on the line of actual control in the Tibetan plateau. And we have learned a lot of lessons from what happened at that time in terms of not just hot war, but also in terms of gray zone tactics. And I would like to mention just a few of these which I think would be applicable even to the case of Taiwan. You know, the aspects which actually come to mind include coercion, the use of muscle power, exerting pressure and weakening the will of the other, influence operations, especially among local elites, lawfare and the use of national security laws, attempts to divide society, the use of surveillance, the use of space and the cyber domains, intimidation, the show of strength, and in the case, of course, as we have seen of Taiwan, testing of the defenses by routine provocations through the use of ships and planes, changing facts on the ground, challenging the ADIZ, the use of maritime militias, research vessels, military exercises, etc. So, in a sense, as India, again, we've had experience of both continental and maritime gray zone tactics. In the last few years, we have seen much more presence of research vessels, of maritime militia on the maritime in the Indian Ocean region, apart from what we are also witnessing over a fairly consistent period of time, which relates to the use of economic tools and economic domination to use predatory practices to subvert national economic development and create abnormal dependencies with a view to generating or enfeebling national will. So I think we are at a stage where we will increasingly be confronted with policy challenges on how to cope with these gray zone tactics. And one of the ways in which I think we can begin is to continuously build up information sharing, focus more on intelligence cooperation, and also, in fact, focus more on exposing and identifying and protecting our vulnerabilities. And in this context, I would say that the Quad and the Indo-Pacific policy that India has adopted and which was spelled out by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Shangri-La in 2018 stand as very clear testaments to how India is having a relook at the Indo-Pacific region. Flowing from this appraisal is the rapid development in the relationship between India and Taiwan. This is relatively new. In a sense, we are making up for lost time. Although, of course, we established our offices in each other's countries in the early 90s, but after 30 years, I see the way the relationship is growing in the last few years to be quite dramatic. Of course, the focus is on technology, in using Taiwan as an indispensable link in a resilient global supply chain to leverage India's size of its market, of its human resources. And so we see a very robust partnership that could emerge and which could, in fact, by itself be a response to the threats that both of us face in this region and how other countries also face. In fact, I would say public opinion in India about Taiwan and the relationship is also changing rapidly. Just a few days ago, we had the chairman of Foxconn, who has had an extremely successful visit. We are talking of investments worth billions of dollars. So I think we are at the start of an exciting journey, but all this is predicated on a deeper understanding of the strategic and the security dynamics that characterize this region, and our determination that these are not transient factors, but these are long-term trends, and we have to steel ourselves and we have to prepare for them in the longer term. So this is the way I would, this I think would be one of the effective ways to counter gray zone tactics and to defend ourselves and to make security in the Indo-Pacific and in the Western Pacific, and of course in the Taiwan Strait, much more resilient. I would also, in this context, point to something which was rather unusual for India, that in August, the 12th of August 2022, after the visit of the United States Speaker Nancy Pelosi, India normally has been very, very silent publicly on Taiwan issues, but on that occasion, we did issue a statement in which we urged the exercise of restraint, avoidance of unilateral actions to change the status quo, de-escalation of tensions, and efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. So I think you are witnessing a different and qualitatively more pronounced or accented Indian policy to the Taiwan Strait, to this part of the world, and in general, I would say, to the Indo-Pacific region, and also to the way India wants to shape its own rise and kind of navigate it in the midst of the rise of China. So I'll maybe stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pan Saran, for your remarks. Yes, we do remember on August 2022, the Indian government statement about the Chinese coercion tactic against Taiwan. And we also hope that in the future that similar the expression could also manifest itself in the Quad meeting itself. That will be important for us. Thank you. And then last but not the least, our very own Chen Mumin, former deputy representative to India, and now he is as a senior advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Actually, I'm a professor now.
And you're also the senior advisor, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. I remember this is probably the third or fourth time I attend a Kalakaran Forum, which started in 2017. I was unable to attend in the past few years because I was in India. And all forums in the past 8 times all focus on strategic and security situation in the region. But I think this year, probably the first time that we place gray zone warfare onto the theme topic for the first panel. I think this is the first time. Here in Taiwan, I'm now in university teaching, and we have a strategic community, or you see the scholars who work on international relations. Quite active, not very big, but quite active. Compared to other countries, the scholars or strategic analysts here in Taiwan focus more on China. So we've been watching China all the time, not in the past 8-10 years, in the past 78 years, we keep watching China. So I think for the people and all for the strategic community on Taiwan, of course, China is the major concern, or you could say a threat. And so what China is doing and what China is thinking will have a huge impact on the situation, security situation of Taiwan. So I'm going to make 3 points over here. The first is what does China really want? Earlier, if we talk about Taiwan-China relations or China threat 10 or 15 years ago, I think that you probably all remember, all people are talking about a possible all-out invasion by China, that kind of Normandy style of invasion on China. Or analysis would say that it's impossible. The reason is very simple. To invade Taiwan, to cross the strait, to mobilize so many forces, and you might have huge casualties. The price is just too high. And also, you see that the security preparations made by Taiwan, or also the U.S. presence in the region, also make this kind of invasion impossible. Yeah. So in Taiwan, I think we all think that we are safe. We were safe, yeah, because that PLA could not, cross the Taiwan Strait, in a conventional way. But everything changed when this concept of gray zone warfare came out. That is, China, they now adopt more coercive means, not really a war, but it's more like brinkmanship. That is, for instance, they conduct military exercise around Taiwan, then send more naval ships or fighter jets around Taiwan, launching missiles, and also in recent year, you see that the Coast Guard or maritime militia also participated in these exercises. All this together, we call it a gray zone warfare. It's not really a war, but quite coercive. And the purpose is very simple, that they want to increase the pressure on Taiwan. It creates political and psychological effects on the government and the people of Taiwan. What does China really want? This is first thing I want to point out. That of course, the Chinese government keeps saying that they want to, reunify Taiwan, and this is their sacred goal. But I think the real intention, the real strategic intention of China is that they want to create their own sphere of influence in the West Pacific. First island chain, second island chain, they want to, get out these restrictions set up by the U.S. in the past decades. And they probably, I don't know if China really think that if they really, control Taiwan, how they will rule this island. But as for now, I think that they maintain some kind of a tension across the strait. It's good for them. It's good for CCP. It's good for the PLA. Yeah, because right now we know that they have a lot of domestic problems, and so the Xi Jinping government, and they rely more on nationalism. And so maintain some kind of a tension across the strait is beneficial to Chinese government. So for them to have this gray zone, strategy over here, actually it's a cheaper but also more effective way to maintain, to achieve their goal. And how did they come into this gray zone warfare? My personal view is, I think that the turning point is the South China Sea. Before 2010 or 2012, you see that the Chinese presence in South China Sea was quite moderate. They negotiate with ASEAN countries. They even talk to Taiwan. Yeah. But since 2013, 14, I don't know the exact time, but you see that China start to militarize all 8 islets under their control, turning all of them into military base. All of them now has an airstrip. All of them now have military, installations. And this act in South China Sea was undeterred. Yeah, international community was unable to blame China. They blame, but no use. Yeah, so I think this gives China more confidence to employ more military or coercive means in the region. So right now, not just South China Sea, Taiwan Strait and East Sea, you also see similar similar situations. So this is the second point I want to make, is what China right now is to employ coercive means to increase its pressure on Taiwan, Taiwanese government, and also on other governments. I think Japan and the US also got affected. And their main purpose is not to have a war, but to maintain this kind of tension situation across the strait. Yeah, because this will benefit, their ruling base in Chinese society. What can we do? The third point I'm going to make is what can Taiwan do, and what can the world do? That's the reason we are here today. Yeah, to have friends from all the world come here to know the situation, and we could think what we could deal with this new situation. Not really a war, but a high tension across the strait actually have some impact on the Taiwanese society. Yeah, not a huge impact, but right now I think that the people do talk more about security, to talk about the possibility of escalation of the tension across the Taiwan Strait in future. I think what Taiwan can do, I'm talking in a very, very general way. The first thing is that Taiwan as a society who have a long connection with China, culturally, history, we keep watching China. Yeah, right now I think that no other place in the world that you have so much information, so much analysis and discussion about China. So this is our advantage. Come to Taiwan to watch China. And actually, we know a lot of problems inside China, but because of they tightly control, media. So a lot of things you don't know what is exactly happening inside. But in Taiwan, because it's a Chinese language speaking society, so actually you see more information about China, inside China. So here I think it's a best place to watch and to analyze. Yeah, so I think we turn Taiwan into this China watching tower. Yeah, this is first thing we can do. And second, I think from military perspective, I'm not a military person, but I think that to build up a credible deterrence is still the best way. And Taiwan cannot do that alone. We cooperate with our partners, our friends, to get militarily prepared. Because if we make the decision makers in Beijing to think that to increase this kind of pressure, the price will be too high. If they cross the red line, then the price was too high. They will not. They will not do it. So build up credible deterrence militarily. I think that is the most important thing that Taiwan and the world have to do. And Taiwan need cooperation or coordination with other like-minded friends. And third thing that I think Taiwan has to do, and I think so far we are doing quite well, is to maintain domestic stability. And many friends come to this forum today. This might be your first time coming to Taiwan. Before you came, probably you saw, oh yeah, I'm going to that war zone place. But actually, you come here, you see that the whole society very stable. It doesn't mean that the people are ignorant. People don't care about the relation with China. People care, but I think that we have a very solid democracy. Civil society. And right now, people knowing that the current situation, we have to be aware of the situation and also to get more prepared. But we cannot go panic. Yeah, we live our own life. We make money, do our job, so keep our society stable and maintain our democracy. I think this is something that at least Taiwan could contribute to the region and to the world. So I hope that we could work more, and I believe that this forum, only one day, but we could have more discussions about what we can do together in the future. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mumin, for your remarks. It's very interesting for you to say, especially in the last, that how we can keep calm, because in the last several months we've been blamed for not have a sense of urgency in Taiwan for the possible war by China on Taiwan. So, but that's a very nice way of defending and about what our response is. I think Chen Mumin earlier, as you pointed out, about this is the first time that we placed the Great Zone Operation front and center in the Katabalan Forum. I think one of the reasons is that also, well, this is what we learned from Europe. That is first of all, when we look at the Great Zone Operation by China on Taiwan, we saw that it followed by the Chinese Great Zone Operation on Japan since the year 2010, and then Chinese Great Zone Operation on Philippines since the year 2012. So there's a pattern that it is not just applied to Taiwan, it has an earlier precedence on Japan, and then South China Sea. And then until in the last several years, Taiwan is the one that bear the pressure. And we also noticed that there's no linkage about the collective response toward the Chinese Great Zone operations. So Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, we all have to deal with by ourselves. So that's another issue that needs to be addressed. But the third, regarding what lesson we learned from Europe is that just prior to the Russians' invasion against Ukraine, if we analyze the Russians' behavior earlier, before its invasion, about all those little green men and other activities, the Russians' Great Zone operations in changing the facts on the ground already happened previously. And that also means that for us to Taiwan to really deter the possible greater contingency, action has to be taken now rather than later. We cannot just wait for China to initiate the attack and then we begin our defense. And in order to deter and dissuade China from doing those, the counter the Chinese Great Zone operation is very important. And not just by Taiwan, but also we believe that the collective actions for the first island chain country here, and also India had the similar issues. Altogether, that's very important. So that this is the debate that Taiwan is facing right now. And by implication, for action to be taken earlier, that also means that how are we able to reconcile with Taiwan wanting to maintain the image that we are not the provocateurs of those contingencies. So the balance between trying to stable and maintain calm, not to be the provocateur, but at the same time, we also need to prevent China from further actions. That is a very difficult issue, and the debate has been going on in Taiwan. So I just laid out this here. I'm not asking you to respond immediately, but I also like to open up to the floor for anyone who would like to raise questions. Please raise your hand and then identify yourself, and please keep your question short. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have a question in the audience right there. Please wait a second as our staff will hand you the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wenbin Liu. I am adjunct associate professor of the National Taiwan Normal University. I have two questions. The first one to our India Mr. Salam. Yes, I think Salam. We all over the world knows about the conflicts, your border conflicts with China, and except these conflicts have any Great Zone attack from CCP around India? The first question. And second question is to Japan, Mr. Takai, right? And how Japan to deal with sea militias from CCP? I mean, a lot of fish boats go around to Fish Island or something like that. How do you deal with that? Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to take several more. There's also one in the back over there. No, that one. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay, one in the back.
Okay, thank you. I'm Domingo Yang from INDSR. I do have a question for Director Rick Waters. So thank you for your remarks. So since you mentioned in order to push back China's multi-dimensional coercions, we need to build up a multi-domain counterforce. So in light of this multi-domain counterforce building, what are the feasible cases? For instance, a more clarification of the UN Resolution 2758, or to invite Taiwan to join the G7's anti-coercion platforms, or to integrate Taiwan's supply chains with the AUKUS Pillar 2 for the advanced technology corporations. Are those the feasible cases that when we're building a multi-domain counterforce? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And probably the lady over there, she also raised her hand. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Swati Arun. I'm a MOFA fellow for this year. I'm from India. My question is, there have been recent shuffling in the PLA, including a new force that has been added. How do we see the changes in the PLA itself reflecting on Taiwan's security and its gray zone operation, including how many leaders have been shuffled within the PLA and the theater commanders who have been shuffled as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And then probably that'll end our first round of questions. I'd like to request the panelists here to respond some of them. Rick, let's start from you.
Sure. Well, look, I'll start with the question from our colleague from INDSR. Look, I think there's no simple answer here. You put forward some good ideas. But I think in a way, the counter strategy needs to be as sophisticated as the strategy that has been developed. And that's why I highlighted where I feel the effort is perhaps the most underdeveloped across the spectrum is in the economic realm. And again, I think that's because partly due to complexity with US politics, there is not an affirmative trade strategy from the US side in the region, partly because the debates about economic security have advanced in Tokyo, they've advanced in some capitals like Taipei, but not yet to the point where they are translating into practical action, collective resilience mechanisms. And so, to me, the challenge before us is to think through practical strategies that fit within the realistic politics of the countries involved. Some of the examples you gave could be good ones, and then actually move forward. And that may be as simple as starting at a national level to develop the tools, the legal authorities, the legislation that would be required to take collective action in the economic realm if and when the circumstances arise, but also being precise about what we're talking about here, because I think to get countries on board, it would have to be WTO compliant, and it would have to stop short of being a collective mechanism to address unrelated issues like overcapacity.
Peter, you would like to respond to something? Okay, you like to pass on, and then Takei and Muro.
I'll add one thing.
Okay, go ahead, yeah.
I think the number one lesson we can take away, for instance, from the Ukraine experience is that deterrence, although it is not cost-free, is far cheaper than fighting a conflict in a war. I mean, we've seen how long the Ukraine conflict has gone on, the amount of money that's been invested by all of our countries in support of Ukrainian freedom and democracy. I think that's a really key thing, and we have to, and that concept that deterrence is not without costs and reassurance is not without costs is really important. And how you build resilience, measures around that economic resilience, but also social resilience. And I think one of the things we don't do enough is, as democracies, lean back on the benefits that democracies have over authoritarian states. We can have conversations with our public and with other communities that is far more trusted based on free and open discussions, an evidence-driven basis that we get from think tanks like the Prospect Foundation, from our universities, from our media, and from our civil society. And rather than, we have to be more proactive, I think, at leaning into building those resilience measures. And that civil society resilience, along with the reforms to the legal frameworks to be able to do economic resilience as well is just as key. And I think we need to accept that deterrence sometimes just sounds good, or we'll just deter them from doing that. But deterrence comes with costs as well, and it comes with some risk. We have to be willing to bear the costs to actually achieve the deterrence. And that involves, from the hard power, as mentioned before, through to the economic and civil society resilience.
Thank you. Very well said. And then Admiral Takei.
Thank you very much, and wonderful question. Your question is how Japan deal with the situation in the Senkaku in the East China Sea, especially for the maritime militia issues. Fortunately, the Japanese government does not observe any existence of maritime militia in East China Sea around Senkaku Island. I think it's due to the number of the maritime militia or the Coast Guard ships, Chinese Coast Guard ships, they are so busy in the South China Sea issues. And I think there are several reasons the Japan can control the situation in the East China Sea, Senkaku Island. There are several reasons. First one, Japanese Coast Guard dispatch the number of the ships bigger than the Chinese Coast Guard in there. If Chinese Coast Guard dispatch 5, Japan Coast Guard dispatch 10 or 15, double or triple. Second one, the United States reassure the Senkaku Island is covered by Article 5 of US-Japan Security Treaty. And second one. Third one is the Japanese government, they eager to strengthen the law enforcing capability as well as maritime self-defense force capability to deal with the situation in the Senkakus, and also the enhancing the ISR capability around the East China Sea with introducing the unmanned aerial vehicles for monitoring the situation in there. And in this chance, I want to discuss how to deal with the gray zone situation in the East Asia. I think the key to dealing with the gray zone situation is that status quo maintenance, Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, never be deterred by the incident. There are the two situations that deterred us. The first one is the government becomes concerned about the escalation and stop responding on the facing stronger reaction of China. Second one is the public becomes accustomed to repeated incident and loses concerns. So prevent this situation, first we have to publicize the incident every time when it happened and communicate to international community that the situation and we have legitimacy to deal with the situation. And second, we have to have a defense capability or maritime law enforcing capability to deal with China, and China cannot underestimate our will. And balance of power is most important to prevent China from making the wrong decisions in East China Sea, and South China Sea, and Taiwan Strait. And third, at the same time, we should continue to stabilize the relationship with China to reduce the tension and the miscalculation, to discourage China's unsafe and unprofessional behavior in the East China Sea and Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, including to dispatch maritime militia in this Senkaku Island, and enhance mutual understanding to enhance mutual understanding with China. These stabilized actions are also needed to dealing with the occurring situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Takei. Now, Mr. Saran.
Yeah, I think there was a question about gray zone with India. So let me, illustrate with a few examples. In 2020, during the mobilization, I mean, that was an example of using hard military power to send a signal, but not engaging in traditional hot war. So when you had mobilization of more than 100,000 troops, dozens of aircraft, dozens of helicopters, dozens of artillery, radars, happening in a span of 4 to 6 weeks, that I think should be a study for what gray zone warfare looks like, where you mobilize without actually utilizing the strength. And the purpose is to weaken the will of the enemy. The second is what we have seen happening over a period of time in terms of the economy. So, for example, the certain sectors of the economy became increasingly vulnerable: telecommunications, social media. And the third, of course, was utilizing the institutional weaknesses to engage in very successful predatory economic practices, again, to weaken, let's say, the manufacturing muscle of the country. And of course, when I talk of social media, you might recall, so when you come to the responses to these kinds of gray zone, and these are only a few examples, so obviously 2020 was a wake-up call for India, and I don't think it'll be the same again. We can never go back to the pre-2020 regime. Similarly, that's on the military aspect. But when it comes even to the economic and let's say, socio-psychological influence, again, you might recall that that was also the period in which the Indian government banned a huge number of Chinese apps. We built those fences in those small yards. There was a fundamental review of the nature of our economic cooperation with China. So the process of responding to gray zone tactics has accelerated without any doubt. And I suspect this is going to be the new norm insofar as India is concerned. Just lastly, on the maritime, so of course all this was happening on the continental, but even on the maritime we saw simultaneous and in parallel visits by research vessels, which was new, aggressively patrolling the coastline, in some cases, and fairly clearly a part of a strategy of encirclement, using, neighbors of India to send signals to India. So all this was part of and is part of the strategy. And so therefore we are faced with, let us say, a two-front kind of a scenario, both on the continental and on the maritime. And of course, as I mentioned, for us, what happens in this part of the world, in the Western Pacific, East China, South China, the Taiwan Strait, these are all lessons which we need to exchange with each other and maybe, learn from each other's experiences and devise strategies.
Thank you. And then Mumi, please.
I think I could respond to the question about the PLA reshuffle. I'm not an expert on PLA, but here in Taiwan, we see a lot of discussion on this issue. Actually, we really don't know, what's the real reason behind this power reshuffle inside the PLA. There are different scenarios. Some scenarios say it's a power struggle inside PLA, and some say that these people, they had a conflict with Xi Jinping, so they were removed. And but my analysis is like this. Xi Jinping's decision-making style is quite different from his previous leaders. During the Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao time, you see that the top of CCP is more like a group leadership. So major decisions are not done by the top leader only. It was, to some extent, a consensus among a group of leaders. So they allow some kind of a compromise. But Xi Jinping's leadership style, is quite different. So he controls everything. So if you lose his trust, if your views are different from Xi Jinping, you are in danger. Something like this. So actually, this is very bad for a government, because all government, if you want to run, smoothly, you also need to have more coordination, also allow different voices. But China get into this, stage, so it became very rigid. This is a situation that a dictator might make wrong decision. Yeah, so that's why we have to be more careful about what Chinese government is doing today. Actually, I also want to say one more thing about gray zone warfare. That is, if you see what China has been doing around Taiwan in the past few months, we noticed that there are some new situation that did not happen before. First is that some of these aircraft and naval ships, they are closer to Taiwan, a bit more closer to our territorial water and airspace compared to before. Yeah, that so it did increase more pressure on Taiwan. And second is you see the recent military exercise conducted in May after inauguration of President Lai, and they did in Jinmen Mazu. Yeah, earlier was only around Taiwan. And right now, they also targeted Jinmen and Mazu, the offshore islands. And also, the Coast Guard and also involved in these exercises. These are the new development we have to watch. Yeah, and of course, what I didn't really answer earlier was that what is China's strategic, their target? What do they really want? My own interpretation is that they want to turn Taiwan Strait into internal water. Yeah, so that is why they became more active around Taiwan. Yeah, but by doing so, it increased the chance of the conflict, a confrontation with the Taiwanese military. So they are actually doing something very irresponsible. That's my answer here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the sharing. And when you mentioned about Coast Guard, I think Taiwan did notice that some of the Coast Guard participate in harassing the Senkaku Islands, and later they started to participate in harassing Taiwan as well. So whether that those two Coast Guard ships, they are on their way and they're coming back, so that's part of their joint missions or not, that's something very new development that we just discovered. So we still have less than 10 minutes. We can open probably 2 questions. Yes, the one in the back. No, the one in the back, please. That one first.
Hello, Radio Free Asia journalist, and 2 questions. Originally, it was going to be towards either Mr. Waters or Mr. Dean, whoever wants to answer, but if any other guests feel they would like to tackle the question, that's fine. The first question is about a general question on why should China not, playing devil's advocate and thinking from this perspective, why should China not feel threatened by the U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific region? Obviously, part of this is just power politics, is, one country has more power now than it did 30 years ago, and that is creating some tension with existing great powers. But in a international order where there are rules, or maybe better termed guidelines, that are not easily enforced when people break them, as we're seeing in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this conflict in Gaza, the past US invasion of Iraq, all you have to go on is the guarantees of other countries that we're going to be behaved towards you, right? That we're not going to threaten you. You have their word and you have their past actions. So in such a system where you can't stringently enforce international law, I'm trying to be careful using that term because it's sometimes used very loosely, where it's hard to enforce that, how can you why should China not feel threatened by the US, and how can they create goodwill between different countries with very, very different ideologies, very different state ideologies? That's the first question. Second,
well, please, because we only
have so much
time
time.
for
Okay,
two
that's
questions.
fine. That's fine.
Yeah, and could you identify yourself and who you would like to address to?
Yes, I said to Mr. Waters or Mr. Dean, but if any other guest would like to answer, and journalist Chase Botiford, journalist from Radio Free Asia.
Okay, thank you. And Raymond Song? Yeah. You have the last questions.
Okay, let's pass the
Raymond.
microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is about the impacts of internal pressures faced by China toward its overall external behaviors. Of course, China is now experiencing extreme internal pressures, including serious economic downturn and a rising domestic widespread discontent, and also rumors of political instability. So how does all those internal pressures impact its overall behaviors? Are we witnessing a more prone to risk-taking nations, or will they acting in a more restrained or less aggressive way? I might add a footnote to that because in Taiwan we experiencing the external intensive, very, very intensive increase of the pressures put on China, put on us. So I'm really, really keen to learn about your observations. Thank you.
Who do you like to address the question to?
The panels who
Everyone?
want to observe some the experience they have about the latest trends of the Chinese external behaviors. Thank you.
Okay, so I just go the reverse order. First, starting from the Moomin Chen, if you'd like to answer some of them.
Last question about China inside. And you see the news that, and I also talked to some Taiwanese who did business in China or visit China recently. The economic situation is no good, that's for sure. That is why I think that Chinese government now, they tolerate this nationalistic sentiment. And in Chinese we say 小粉红. Those pro-China net users, they became very, very aggressive on the internet also on foreign policy issues. It's very natural for any authoritarian government to use nationalism as a tool to divert the people's discontent at home. So I think for Taiwan and also for the world, we are not just dealing with Chinese government or CCP. We also have to deal with this irrational voice in the Chinese society. Because of the tight media and data control in China, most people in China, they don't know the real situation. A lot of things they only receive very biased information and very easy to be mobilized emotionally. So we have to be very, very careful in watching and dealing with this situation. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah. On the China external and partly in response to the earlier question, I think the issue here is how is China going to position itself in the Indo-Pacific region and in the Asian continent? I mean, that really goes to the heart of the matter. What kind of a major power does it see itself? And what kind of an order is it trying to either create or not create? The evidence so far shows that its view is not conducive to an open and a free security architecture. The thesis and the thinking is more of a hierarchical nature, and that will bring it into increasing conflict with established powers and rising powers and the smaller countries of the region. So if China has to live in a community of nations in this region and in the Indo-Pacific and the Asian continent, it has to do a very fundamental rethink of how it sees the evolution of such an architecture in the future. If it is a question of concentration of power and influence and everyone else being peripheral, then you will never have the kind of equilibrium that we all wish to have. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Amuro, Take, you'd like to say something?
So as for the Chinese domestic issues, right now China's top priority is to rebuild the inside the issues, especially for the economy. But however, as long as Xi Jinping is instruction to prepare for the invasion in 2027 for military leader, we should receive such an order. It's quite important because with the Xi's order, the military leaders could hardly say they are unprepared by 2027. Now China is seeking or preparing a timing to change the status quo in gray zone situations.
I agree with what was said completely. This is about, I think, to a large degree, Xi's leadership of the PRC and what has changed in China. United States behaviour in our region has been entirely consistent for a very long period of time. It is a Pacific power. It is part of the region. And we overlook that the US went to extraordinary lengths to bring China into the World Trade Organization, to liberalise its economy, and to invite China into supporting the very rules-based international order that has made us all prosperous and largely kept this region exceptionally peaceful. Since Xi Jinping has taken power, as I said, Chinese views of how it thinks the order should operate has changed, yet the states within the region do not accord to that. And largely, if you look at declared US strategy, for instance, at their national defense strategy, national security strategy, the United States is a status quo power, is not attempting to force China to change its role in the region. It's responding at the moment to Chinese behaviour, and also its alliances are sovereign decisions that states like Australia and Japan and the other states choose to have with the United States. It's not something that the United States coerces in the region. So I think what was said exactly before is, look at Chinese behaviour and compare it to the way the United States has consistently behaved, from freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight for decades and decades.
I think Peter said it well, and I got a sign that time is up. But if I could just add one quick point at the risk of being between you guys and lunch. I do think that if you take the longer view, if you normalized China's view of how it operates in the region we discuss, it's actually going to be self-defeating to China's global ambitions. And I think those debates are underway in China. I actually have a bit of an optimistic take on this in the long run, that some element of what we're seeing now is the excess that will be corrected as they realize there's a contradiction between trying to reshape global norms such as UNCLOS and a desire to have a blue water navy. So again, I'll end us on an optimistic note that it may just be that what is required is consistency, perseverance, upholding the norms, but also having honest dialogue with Chinese interlocutors so they themselves come to adjust these policies over time.
Thank you, Rick. And just on the Rick very optimistic note, please join with me in thanking the panelists on the podium for a very insightful conversation that we have. And we do not want to be in a way between your great lunch and another anticipated great speech by the former premier of the Slovakia. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Many thanks to Dr. Lai for moderating and all our panelists for your insights. And you may return to the audience. Thank you very much.